Someone said if you guys put one theory in Avengers Doomsday, what would it be? It'd be one that makes the most sense that I can't even take credit for, but I put my own little spin on it. So y'all remember in Captain America 1, right, where Steve is being driven to the place where he eventually gets Super Soldier Serum, and he's in the car and he's talking to Peggy. So as they're driving, Steve is like pointing out all the places that he'd been beat up in. He said that alley, that parking lot, and behind that diner. When Peggy just pretty much just asks him, well, why haven't you just ran away from the situation entirely? And Steve explains, well, if you start running, they'll pretty much just never let you stop. And that it's always just better to stand up and fight. But it's also the same scene that sets up the entire movie where Steve is pretty much telling Peggy that he's never had a dance with a woman before because he's always claimed that he's just been waiting for the right partner. Well, fast forward to the end of the movie, and Steve decides that he's gonna have to land this plane in the water. There's no other choice, and obviously he isn't gonna make it. So they're on the comms and they're talking, and they set up a date and a time and a place on where they decide to have the very first date, and then the comms go black. Then Steve wakes up. He realizes that he's just laying on a hospital bed, but he's listening to a baseball game on the radio. With one thing that's just a little bit off, the fact that he was at that game that he's listening to on the radio, and he knows that something is off. First, a nurse comes rushing in, and then the guards after that, and he knows that he has to run. He has to make a break for it. He bursts through the room, bursts out the front doors of this building that he's now in, and he looks around, but now he's standing in the middle of 2011 Times Square. He realizes that he'd been asleep for almost 70 years, but most importantly, he missed that first date. Now fast forward to the events of Endgame, and for the first time, the Avengers really lost. Half the universe is gone. Everybody's devastated. Nobody knows what to do with themselves, from the heroes to the regular and average everyday people, until Tony Stark invents time travel. And although Thanos already used the stones to destroy the stones, they have this idea to find each stone throughout time and recreate the Infinity Gauntlet itself. But then they figure out that if they just pick the right year, 3 of those 6 stones are in New York, all at the same time. And so here's where the theory just really starts to cook. Okay, Steve is out there fighting an old version of himself, and while Hulk is having this super long talk with the Ancient One about replacing the stones the moment that they were taken so that the timeline isn't messed up in their timeline, Tony and Scott pull the plug on 2012 Tony's heart, giving him a mini heart attack, right? The Tesseract falls and Loki takes it, and then we get the entire Loki series. But then the question becomes, we know that they failed. They had to go back in time to the 1970s to now get the Tesseract from that army base. So when Cap went back and returned it, he returned it to 1970 at that army base. Meaning when Loki stole it from that timeline, that becomes that timeline's canon. So what happened to that timeline? Well, we all know that Tony learns from his mistakes. So maybe he had Jarvis run some type of analysis on what really gave him a mild cardiac arrest. And that's when Jarvis tells him,
Sir, somebody was inside your heart.
Tony says, no, that can't be. What do you mean that someone was inside my heart? Pull up surveillance. And when he does, he sees just that. He watches himself fly into a window as the Avengers surrounding Loki, and then watches a little man get flicked into his shirt. Then immediately after, watches Cap get into an elevator and whisper, "Hail Hydra." He then sits there on the surveillance and he watches 2 Captain Americas fight each other. He doesn't know who is who or what is what to believe anymore, because you got to remember, at this point, he had just went into the wormhole, meaning everything that happened 3-4 movies after that took time to figure out that anxiety point, it's times 10. This just happened. So he completely steps away from the outside world, only to lock himself away in his garage to figure out how there were 2 versions of all of the Avengers all around New York. And then he figures out that it was time travel. And so instead of dedicating the next 10 years of his life to becoming a better person for the people of Earth, he dedicates the next 10 years to figuring out time itself for the people of time. He figures out everything that there is to know about time: nexus events, variants, anchor beings, branches, and most importantly, incursions. And that's when he finds out, due to the events of Endgame, the Avengers caused an incursion that would destroy his timeline. Everybody, everything that he cares about is going to be annihilated. Rhodey, gone. Happy and Pepper, gone. The idea of one day having a family is absolutely ripped away selfishly by future versions of himself in the Avengers to save the people of their timeline, completely disregarding his. And so now, while Cap is going back in time to now return 2 of the 6 stones, when he returned the time stone to the Ancient One, the Ancient One told him that he had created a threat that is tenfold worse than Thanos. She shows Cap the future of now what is supposed to be this reality, where Tony becomes Doom. And so knowing that, he knew that Doom couldn't be stopped at this point. And so when Cap went back to 1970 to go give the Tesseract back to that army base and have his dance with Peggy, he knew that it wasn't only his first dance with Peggy, but that it was going to be his last.